if we get ourselves bogged down in the politics of education, we'll never make the systemic common sense changes that almost all educators know are issues and often agree are issues, regardless of whether they're public, private, or even or charter, or on any of the spectrum.
I think Skillman bringing together visionaries across the city is really incredible for many different reasons.
Slide to the left.
Hey.
Slide to the right.
Yeah, we cha-cha slide.
Hey.
It's time for an overhaul of our education system, especially when we talk about public education in an urban setting. Our world is shifting, and it's time that we shift the way we educate our young people to keep up with the times, not just here in the United States, but all around the world.
I respect and love to hear the different viewpoints. Sometimes it helps to challenge your own thinking.
I am looking forward to just having a raw, unfiltered conversation with people who are doing the work. Oftentimes we see people on podcasts and on social media, and they have these viral conversations. But sometimes I wonder, are you really doing the work?
And if there was ever a point that we needed to be focused on change, to have courage around change, it's right now.
No, you can stay there.
I want to know why Mario moved.
Well,
I was with you.
I was here with agree, because that's generally how I feel. But I also try not to be an absolutist, and I think that there's conversation that can be had about what transformation looks like and if it's necessary in every aspect. And I think sometimes people, kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, and that does even more of a disservice. But then I saw everybody else over here, so I thought it's a private conversation.
I agree with
Yeah.
that point, but I still strongly agree it needs to be
Yeah,
reformed.
no.
I feel like the students' voice must be at the table at all times, because there's so much missed. Definitely the parents, but sometimes the students are the parents. And they see things from a whole different perspective. So they have to always be involved at the highest level and at every table. So that's, I think, one of the biggest changes I'd love to see.
I'll just add, I think education has been done the same for hundreds of years, and I think we need to explore different ways. Students are learning different. We have done so much different over the years, but our education model has stayed the same, and I don't think we can continue to stay the same as everything else around us evolves.
I think public education is also fundamental. Historically, it is actually the tool that created the levels of equality and equity that we're still struggling with today. But if we didn't have a public education system in the United States, literally none of us would be standing in this room. It has been a great equalizer. At the same time, it has created divisions and dynamics. And that's why what's important about where we're standing is recognizing that it does need to have dramatic changes. But I think what's really important is that we do ground ourselves in that everyone should have access to a high quality, nurturing public education system so that no one gets left behind while we keep working on improvements, but that we make sure that everyone has access to that.
Is it an all or nothing? Because once you brought that up, it made me think but there is transformation. Not all public education is not working. There have been transformations. We have examples nationally of all kind of achievement gaps that have been broken in institutions that are public. And so I don't know if everything needs transformation or if the things that are broken need transformation.
But my concern is when we think about it, or as I think about it, I'll own it. If we think about saying the system doesn't work, then inadvertently, for some of us, it feeds into this notion about, let's throw it out. So back to your point about doing the analysis and determining where we are. So it's just us being really cognizant of even the times that we're in now, how our language carries power. And so as we think about being cautious about our absolutes, myself included, how do we make room for this, but also saying that we don't want where people use our words and say, that's exactly why we need to dismantle the whole thing. So just, being conscious that, we're in a really different kind of time period.
But that's why I think we need to be intentional and say it's not working for that exact reason. So I'm a person that came to education from outside the world of education. And what I find when I talk to lifelong educators is they're married and protective of the system in which they work versus being able to objectively step outside and analyze and say, you know what, this is not working, or even these pieces are not working, because they're so married to the system the way it is. Whereas those of us that come to education from outside and have benefits of other work-life experiences are able to say, well, wait a minute, in no other space will we allow these things to continue. In no other space do we not challenge even those things that we think are working. Again, that's why I'm so adamant, it does need to be torn down in order to rebuild it the way that it works for all of us.
I kind of feel like it's a starting point. Public education is a starting point, not necessarily like something that should disappear, but a starting point. And it sets the standard at the very least. Not a standard of excellence, but a standard of normalcy, especially looking at what school-coded residential placements for foster kids look like. They're considered school, where the concept of school is just weird, So at the very least, showing up with your friends who are the same age at the same time, that social network, coming to a specific place and being able to build with everyone else that's involved in that system.
Sawa Gabrai. I am a foster youth advocate with Park West Foundation. In education, we have a lot of young people that are frequently moving. So it's helping young people first in preparing for college, but also in being able to connect them to what they're missing as they're moving from school to school. And then we have a lot of young people who have to drop out of school because of these movements, and getting them back in school, helping them to graduate, and then also to help them, to just support them as they go through college as well. With education, it just opens doors so they can have a better future. And that's the reason why, we advocate for education.
I'll stay right here.
Yeah.
Stay right here.
I know, yeah, I think that's more me.
Yeah, I think that communities, cities that are excelling, that are healthy, that people want to be part of, have options like that. Whether it's an all-male academy, whether it's a charter school, whether it's a private school, whether it's a all-female academy. I think if you look at successful communities across the United States, you will see a diverse range of educational opportunities that exist. Medical themed type schools, technology themed type schools, art and dance type schools. They exist everywhere. And I think you have to have choices like that. I know your initial question had to do with private and charters, but they are part of that option that parents and communities should have.
So I agree, because families should have those options, and different charter schools, private schools have different areas of focus. So families should be able to choose what aligns with their values and their interests. And I think, having diversity in terms of, having these options available also adds a level of healthy competitiveness. And that's not always a bad thing.
I agree.
Yeah, so I don't know. I probably should more be here because I'm probably more in between disagreeing and neutral, only because I've seen in Detroit how it has worked. And so I do agree in other states it has worked well. In Detroit, we were known as the Wild Wild West of charter schools because within 10 years, we had 54 schools open and closed. In a 10-year period, it destabilized neighborhood schools. And it just wasn't a model that worked. You could just wake up in the morning and say you wanted to start a charter school. You didn't have to talk to the mayor. You didn't have to talk to the current school district. You didn't have to do anything but find someone to charter you and you could open up a school. And it was just a flood of schools in markets that didn't need schools and a desert in markets that really needed schools. So if it's done well, maybe so, but it just wasn't done well in Detroit, and we're still trying to recover from how it wasn't done well in Detroit.
Y'all so smart.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good point. So if implemented as designed, it could work really, really well. The challenge, as you said, is when it's not implemented as it should be, when there isn't a level of oversight that's absolutely necessary, and consequences for those who are negligent. There's accountability that needs to be there. And the biggest problem there is those are the formative years. So if a child goes through even 1 or 2 years in a school that is not doing as they should, there's a lot of learning loss and regression that happens there.
We fought for accountability in the 2016 legislation. We fought really hard, and there still isn't. There is more, but there still isn't charter accountability in the city. And one of the reasons why we fought is because in 2015, we had a school close 2 weeks after Count Day, who had seniors that were scheduled to graduate, 157 students that we had to figure out what to do. And that's just the reality of if you don't have accountability, it's wonderful where it's working. And there are some, don't get me wrong, there are some beautiful charters who are working well and they hold themselves accountable. But what about those who don't? And who's holding them accountable? And right now there's not an entity in the city that is.
I am the guy who went to DPS K-12. My family was privileged enough to have me, they traveled or they took me to the better schools in Detroit Public School. And so I was kind of isolated, and so I thought that was the DPS, experience, because I went to an Afrocentric elementary school where Rosa Parks used to be chilling up at my school because she lived in the same apartment building as my principal. I saw successful Black people every day. Right? Then I went to Renaissance High School and graduated. But when I went to college, I started learning about the disparities in education and realized the experience I had at DPS was not the same experience as the majority of the young people who had to go to their neighborhood schools or their families couldn't drive them across town to the better school, quote unquote. And this is, quote unquote better. But so I decided I was gonna graduate from college. I'm gonna come to Detroit Public Schools. I'm gonna be that. I'm gonna change the landscape and give them the experience. And all my friends who I graduated with said the same thing. And when we graduated, DPS was on a hiring freeze. And so we couldn't get a job as a teacher, even if we wanted to in DPS. And then charter schools were like, hey, come over here. We got options. And so I was able then to, do what I thought I was going to be doing in DPS in charter spaces. And I'm not saying that charters are the best option in the world, right? But it gave me as an educator an option to actually reach young people and to make a difference. And then I realized these are the same kids in Detroit. Whether,
that part.
And in a lot of cases, the schools I worked at in charter schools are old DPS schools. And so that building was just laying there dormant for a bunch of different political reasons that, I won't go down, that's a whole nother conversation. But as much as I've been able to impact, or to be in charter schools, I feel like I've been able to impact young people. And if we're concerned about Detroit kids in general, public, charter, private, they're still our babies. They're still the ones that are gonna grow up to be the adults that we have to interact with in the community.
That's right.
And we need to make sure that they have strong foundations and the education system, wherever they go, that they have to have the best. because our society depends on it. My name is Mario Lemons. I am the head of school or principal at Detroit Achievement Academy. My role in education is really to be a leader, to lead people to opportunities, to what's possible, to empower young people, but also the staff, as well as our families, to be the best that they can be, but also to connect resources and community members, and also schools of thought so that people can learn from one another and grow and develop to be who they are. Education is so important to me because I am a product of strong education. And when I talk about education, it's not necessarily just a school building, but what you're learning in your everyday life. Young people are learning and growing from all types of adults and experiences socialized by community members. And so that is education. All of those things that young people are able to learn from and grow from, and then they're gonna become the adults then who are gonna impact the community.
I'll just say one more thing on this, and that is placement, right? And so a charter school has the unique ability to say where they're going to be. And as an East Sider in Detroit, they don't often say East Side. They often say West Side, Midtown. And you'll see the quote unquote better charter schools in those areas that have affluency, right?
Our sister school is on the East Side.
You're one, you know what I'm saying?
I just gotta say, I'm so appreciative of you putting charters in a historical context. And I'm appreciative that you mentioned that for the kind of excitement and diversity that we want in programming, is sometimes those kind of venues give us more flexibility. Your experience was like mine. Mine was, I went to a wonderful Thurkle Elementary, Winship, which is around the corner, and CT, Cass Tech. But I think the issue is that we have to remember is that it happens in a political climate. And so again, being cognizant, so the reality is we do not have equity in funding for education in this country across the board. We certainly don't have it in the state of Michigan, and we certainly don't have it in Detroit. And if we think we have a charter challenge here in Detroit, look at the rest of Michigan. You know, we have over 600 intermediate school districts. Why do we need that many? And because these kinds of inequities in distribution of the dollars, in distribution and access to private money that maybe you don't have or someone else has, it literally undermines what we all want, and parents are saying, can I have a quality, wonderful experience, whether I live on the east side, whether I live northwest, et cetera. So there's so much work for us to better understand the political climate, really be focused on making sure that we have equitable distribution of those dollars and resources, and that we recognize that schools don't function by themselves. The same issues that we're having in education, mental health has those, public health has that, DHS has that. So, you know, we've got real work to do to go across the aisle to work with each other, but let's really understand the economics and the politics that have affected our ability to be able to support really quality and great teachers in classrooms and schools.
I'm biggest.
Not the biggest.
So this was a difficult one for me because while I don't think that funding in itself is the biggest issue, funding will allow us to put into place solutions for other challenges that we have. So throwing money at the issues without a clear strategy about what the funding will allow us to do will not help the situation. But if we're more strategic in how the funds are used, then I do agree that funding will be helpful.
So to your point, that's exactly why I didn't go that way, because I agree how we fund education is a critical problem we need to solve. But in my experience, how we use the funds we already have is an even bigger issue. Before I came to Detroit Public Schools, the perception was that Detroit Public Schools were broke, that there was no money, that there were no resources, that things were not available. And then when I got to the other side of the curtain, while we definitely could use more funding, what I realized was how we prioritize our funding is very skewed. It's very subjective based on who is the leader at the time, who's sitting at the table at the time. And so for me, I just feel our strategy needs more attention and more focus. The other reason that I am cautious about saying funding is the most critical is funding is very political. And if we get ourselves bogged down in the politics of education, we'll never make the systemic, common sense changes that almost all educators know are issues and often agree are issues, regardless of whether they're public, private, or even or charter or on any of the spectrum. Educators very often agree about what's important, but that doesn't always translate upstairs or to the decision makers in terms of how we allocate even the funds that we already have. And I'm nervous that if we bring more money into a system that doesn't have a strategy, now you're just throwing more money at the same problems and in the same spaces versus actually solving and addressing problems.
I agree.
What you say?
I'm Anika Akins McEvans, and I'm the Assistant Director of Athletics for Detroit Public Schools Community District. I oversee athletic programming for students K-12. It's approximately 10,000 students in Detroit Public Schools, and I do everything from building the schedules to managing the events, managing student eligibility. Anything related to sports, it comes through me. Education is one of the few spaces in our society that we should all be able to agree is important, first and foremost. But more personally, my family has always valued education, and as African Americans, it's one of the ways that we gain access and opportunity, and kids are exposed to spaces that they otherwise wouldn't. And for me, it was a career choice where I got to interact with people on a daily basis and actually see the impact of my work on a daily basis. So that's why I love education.
I was just gonna say, I totally agree with what you said, right? I do believe it's both and.
Yeah.
I think we need a strategy, but we do need more money. There's lots of analysis that has said that we are $4.3 billion for what we really need to fix all of our buildings, to hire all the teachers and pay them what they're worth. And all of the things that we really need, there's more money that is needed to even bring students up to equitable what everyone else is receiving. And I think we do need to get to that equitable level, but I don't think we should just throw money at it. I think we need to have that strategy as well, but we do need the money.
Define equitable. How do you define equitable?
Every student has what they need in order to learn is equitable to me. So every student has what they need. And what one student needs may not be equivalent to what another student needs, right? And so right now what we have is equality in funding, but we don't have equitable funding. And so our students who are in Detroit may have more need for different and various reasons, most of being in high poverty living, right? They have more needs than someone else who may be living in Bloomfield Hills, right?
So I would argue we don't even have equal funding yet. So, and that's why I asked how you define equitable, because equity is a big part of who I am and the work that I do.
For sure.
But I'm challenged in that we use the
ain't
words
even
equity and equal interchangeably, and we talk equity. Well, we haven't even got to equal.
Correct.
Let's get to equal funding where every child gets the same dollars.
Yeah.
Then we can talk about the additional needs on top of top of that. So I just want.
I agree.
I think it's a continued and/or. I really like how you did that. So having had the opportunity, I've worked on educational reform, being outside of the system. But the thing that we see consistently. So if we were in Bloomfield Hills right now, our babies would be getting almost $3,000 more a year per pupil. And that's the system is designed that way. On the other hand, if we were living in no-name Arkansas, not to put down Arkansas, but I can't think of a city, Little Rock, okay? So if our babies were in Little Rock, they would have another level. So when we talk about public education, what's the minimum that we want to make sure? And then there actually are tools that could help us define those things, and then we got to hold ourselves and our systems accountable to implement them correctly.
And I think too that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are some states here in the US that are doing really, really well in that area. We look at Massachusetts, we look at New York, we look at New Jersey. And what's the common denominator there? And I know I'm oversimplifying this, is they pay their teachers really, really well. And even looking outside of the U.S., countries that are doing really well and are known to have high quality education. Finland, for example, same thing. Teachers are viewed; they're on par with doctors. That's not what we see here in the U.S. Teachers are not as respected; they're not as valued, and that's an issue that needs to be resolved. But the idea that there are states in the U.S. that are comparable to some of, that have similar challenges to what we have here, it's worth looking at.
Absolutely. Of course.
You were told to move too, but I'm gonna.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
You are.
That's
so
okay.
You start. Go, Saba.
yes, because the focus should be the kids. We just have to focus on the kids. There should be no additional conversation. We have to educate them, we have to raise them. And at times it doesn't start with the kids, and that's a problem.
We've been hearing this like forever. Get the politics out of it. I don't think we're gonna get the politics out of it. Right now, we have $10,000 a student in the city. I can fight and talk about how we need $15,000 per student or $20,000 per student. I need to work with this 10,000 right here. DPS has 50,000 students. There's more children in the city, they say, attending charter schools than attending the DPS system. So you add another, 50, 51, 52,000 kids that are attending charter. So we have 100,000 kids in this city that we have to educate, whether they attend traditional public or charter public. We have to make that work. So while all that fight, and it does need to happen, that battle needs to continue. But in the meantime, as much as we can keep it out at the local level, minimize it, because it exists in the local level. There's no question about it. So we need to try to minimize it and then try to stretch it and make it work as best we can. My name is Juan Jose Martinez. I am the superintendent at Cesar Chavez Academy Schools in Southwest Detroit. I work with school principals at Cesar Chavez. I work with our board of directors. I do a lot of work with the community that helps support us in the job that we're trying to do. Work with the budget office a lot and other departments that help make our school go. Education changed my life. I grew up, born and raised in Detroit. Always heard messages from my grandmother about going to school. And out of respect for my grandmother, I did what she asked me. And in the process though, I learned the value of education. I know how it changed my life, and I know what it can do for the kids in the city and the community in which we serve.
So I agree. It's, while we can't wait until, a miracle happens in which politics is taken out of this conversation, I think we have to look at what's within our control, right? We are all connected, and there are ways to modify our message depending on who we're talking to. Bringing in the business community, for example, because I mentioned that we're all connected in the same way that the business community, the education community, the higher education community, everyone is connected in some way to individuals who are in positions to make changes happen, right? So if we're all sending the same message or a similar message, my hope is that eventually it'll get somewhere.
Yeah, I really like that you're saying that, because it's advocacy. I mean, and politics gets moved by people who help to influence policy. And I would submit every single one of us in this quasi-circle have that. We all have influence. We work with parents. Parents' voices are so critical, particularly those who have been marginalized. And so as we look at the change, yeah, you're right. So in some ways, when you get that allocation, you work that allocation for the best. But I would submit this is really time for us to say that's not enough. And to your point about saying we have to push for change, we really have to, so that the advocacy that we want is our opportunity now to engage other educators, to engage business people, to engage people from DHS, et cetera, to say, what is the system of public education with the variations on the theme that we want to say and what do we want to have happen? So our voices matter. Our brains, our hearts, our future matter. And we don't have to accept things as they are, because we wouldn't be where we are if we had always been accepting the status quo. My name is Jametta Lilly, and I am blessed to serve as the president and CEO of the Detroit Parent Network. So the Detroit Parent Network for over 23 years has been about the business of educating, equipping, and empowering parents. We build up parents to know that their voices matter in the growth and development, not only of their children, but our entire community and thus our overall world. I care about education because, quite frankly, it's in my DNA. I was born into a family that understood that education is liberation. Whether it was my father who was in higher education, whether it was my grandmother who with the piano taught the children there in Texas, whether it was my great-great-grandmother who had the audacity to create one of the very first Black schoolhouses in LaPorte, Texas, which still stands in history. I know through the struggles and the aspirations, not only of Black, Indigenous, and other people, that this country, it's education that began to create a more level playing field for all of us.
It's important that you see yourself. I think that we, being people of color, often don't see ourselves in society. And so if you also don't see yourself in books, and you don't see yourself in teachings that you're learning every day, then you don't value yourself. You think that the other cultures are more valuable than you are because you don't see yourself as valuable.
I mean, I'm a product of culturally relevant education. I mean, who I am today is because I saw powerful, educated Black people every single day. And then I learned about who I am and my history. And I grew up with that confidence. I went to Michigan State, and that was the first time I realized that people thought Black people weren't as powerful and educated and beautiful because I was in the dorm and I was the only Black guy in the dorm, and I had to be confronted with blatant racism in a way that I hadn't before. But it gave me even more of appreciation for how I was raised and how I was educated. So then decided to go back into Detroit and do that for our young people. So I am the adult that the young people, I am the adult that the adults were for me when I was a young person. Yeah. And so I'm always empowering them, telling them their hair is beautiful and look at you, give me a hug. I'm giving them all that love. And my teachers are reading books with content that's relevant to them. We're allowing them to bring their experiences into the classroom so that they can feel connected. We're giving back to the community. We're having our young people say, hey, you are an important part of our community, so how could you create products that are gonna impact our community? And so that culturally relevant education is making a huge difference in our society right now if you do it right and if you're intentional about it. And so I'm grateful for that opportunity.
So I think culturally relevant education is misunderstood. Kids need to feel like they're a part of a community. They need to feel a sense of belonging. They need to be motivated. They need to know that just because they didn't experience something, I'll use myself as an example. I was not born in the US. So when I was learning about certain things, holidays, for example, I did not have that frame of reference. It reinforced how different I am and how much I didn't know. And I know for some of my peers, the fact that they did not understand some of these things, they were mislabeled. And that's a problem. So just because you are from a different culture, or maybe not as proficient in a language, we have to be so careful about misdiagnosing, misplacing students in a special needs classroom, for example, or in a remedial, reading classroom. So that's where I've seen, the biggest issues, and has been my lived experience. My name is Anissa Sahuba, and I'm a Senior Director at Access, overseeing regional programs that include youth and education and workforce development. The work that I do in education is ensuring that we're looking at education in a really comprehensive way. So really thinking about what are the different elements that children need in order to succeed both in school, in life, and then post-secondary, and then ultimately in the workforce. Ensuring that they feel that they're part of a larger community, that they have this sense of belonging, including teaching kids about advocacy and having them realize that they have a much bigger influence on what happens with them, what happens in their communities, what happens within their families. So I'm an immigrant from Yemen, from this village that's 6 hours from the nearest city. So I look at education from that lens. And while initially I thought education is a privilege, it's definitely not a privilege, it's a necessity.
I think the other thing is like so often happens in this country, we do this either or. And really the reason that culturally, that it's so important to have that cultural representation is because of the misrepresentation. And so I'll use history as an example. If we told United States history from a perspective of the history of the entire United States and we designed our curriculum in that manner, more people would be represented. However, our guide of United States history is driven from the majority perspective, and the majority perspective only, from a white male perspective typically. And so if for those that are on the other side of the umbrella, if they want culturally relevant education to go away, then I would suggest that they redesign a history or redesign a curriculum that is actually inclusive of our entire country. And then there may not be as much need for culturally relevant spaces because everybody would be more relevant.
And to more directly answer your question, I think people are afraid. So we come from America that is set in perfectionism, and so everything about us has to be perfect, and we are better than everyone else. And so in order to do that, I have to whitewash some of the things that we did that weren't so well, and I can't put that in history books because I don't want my white children to feel guilty like they were slave owners in the past. And you got all these kind of things going rather than telling the whole story. Yeah, you got it wrong. Admit that you got it wrong. And then educate your children on how we never do this again. And that's just not where we are as a country.
But even that perspective, they didn't get it wrong. We didn't get it wrong. They got it wrong. So we need to be honest about that.
That's the we that
right?
today
Those words have power. You're absolutely right. This young person didn't get it wrong or right. They weren't even alive. So it's a factual presentation of what things that happened, and that's no more, no less. It happened in this manner, we move on. And so that's also has to be part of our education of all of us.
I agree.
It's not a we. I didn't do it either.
Yeah.
You know.
Is it states' full control?
Full? Oh.
That word full.
That's a weird one.
Yeah.
I disagree. As we talked about how education is politicized, there's so many schools of thought and such a spectrum of what people think is best for kids, what's harmful for kids, what's most important for communities. And I think that even in Michigan, there's such a spectrum of it. And so the thought that Michigan would be in charge of everything and there will be no oversight or protections for communities that are marginalized or not even thought of as often, it's kind of scary to be honest. And so I think having the federal government in some capacity to help oversee or to help with some checks and balances for the states will be of service to our young people.
What are your
So I'm where I am on this question for two things. And so I'll address your portion as well. I think that the problem of education is too big for the federal government to manage, dictate, and direct, and even hold accountable, quite frankly, the success of educational systems. So I feel that the Department of Education, while I disagree with the complete dismantling of it, I think similar to where we talked to earlier, there needs to be some transformation of the Department of Education and how they're involved. My disagreement with the statement earlier was when you say states should have full control. I don't think any level of government should have full control of any of our systems. And honestly, I believe that in order to really reform education, we need to shrink it down to local control, where municipalities locally control their educational system. And so we spoke earlier, Juan mentioned earlier about the number of charter schools, the number of schools in Detroit public schools. The group that's missing from that conversation, and has been for a long time, is city government. There's been a turf war between the city government and Detroit public schools since the beginning of time that needs to stop. It needs to end now. If we believe that Detroit is a city that's on the rise, which I believe most of us do, that's why we continue to live and raise our families here, the city government has to be more involved in our educational process. Unfortunately, federal government can't fix that problem for us. And if we leave it to federal government, it'll never get addressed because it's just too big. There's too many cities, there's too many issues, there's too many schools. So federal government should have a large hand in terms of dispersing funds, managing disbursement of funds, things like that. And I think that's where their role really should stop. Everything else should be more localized.
Yeah, so I'm standing in where I'm standing in total agreement with that, though, for the same reason. So I don't think states should have total control. I do not agree with the dismantling of the federal system, and I definitely agree that we need more local control. I think our local municipalities, won't name names, have been hands off and okay with doing whole speeches that leave out the 100,000 kids in the city of Detroit. I think that's crazy that you could do a whole speech and not mention the people who are the most important in the city. My name is Whitetrice Harris, and I am the Senior Director of College Success and Partnerships with the Detroit Promise. So if you live in the city of Detroit and graduate from a Detroit high school, we provide a tuition-free path to school. So I run the College Success team. Once the students have decided what college they're going to, we make sure that they persist and graduate. I care about education because it changed my life, it changed my whole family's life. I am a second-generation college student, but I am married to a first-generation college student who, when I met him, had dropped out of high school at 16. I was able to convince him, because I had a college path, to go back to college, and now it's changed the trajectory of his life, my life, and his whole family's life. There are now 3 or 4 college graduates behind him. So I've seen personally what education can do and how it can take people from where they thought they were to where they are now.
I think it goes down to the parents' engagement, the investment, and the whatever it takes to engage those parents in every school district and every school. Because like right now, like for the things that we're looking at, for example, there are some innovative mandates on a federal level that we're depending on that's not implemented on a state level, that we're struggling to implement on a state level. So we are absolutely looking at not only the standards set by the federal mandates, but also other states who've implemented those things to be able to say, hey, can we please catch up, with these innovative mandates that's been set on a federal, level, but it's not that they're controlling the state. It's just they're creating a standard of how we should move together.
I think it reminds me of like, I broke a toy and now I'm gonna give it back to you. So this system, or automobile as it was earlier, has been broken for a long time, and now it's like, oh my God, it's broken. I don't want to deal with that. You take all of this back and you deal with it. And it's just like everyone has said, it's way too big, way too layered for just the state to hold on to. And this is an everybody problem. And so everybody got to put in.
You know, you're so right. But a lot of, I'm wondering many people, and particularly our families, don't know that the Department of Education was precisely built and created to address the inequities that existed, particularly around civil rights, children with special needs, kids who are in foster care, Black and brown children marginalized. It is actually the federal government that has been pushing for that kind of more equality and equity. And in fact, right now, all of our children that are involved in early on, kids with special needs, that whole system is being just, blasted away. And in fact, the states, actually have always had more control. So, there's a lot more for us to better understand what is systematically being done. And let's just not forget this, that we've had serious inequalities on the part of states, how they raised and supported education overall. And that's not going away, unfortunately, given the dynamics that we see in DC. So again, we've got work to do to better understand and move this together. I like that. I noticed you had like 1 foot up. like I was.
When we value someone, we take care of them. We have a history.
Oh, girl, if you're gonna put it like that.
Right. It's clear they are not the priority. It's clear we're asking them to take a vow of poverty. It's clear we don't care about their well-being. It's just very clear that, they are just a token in all of this and not important.
I am Amber Redrick, and I serve as the CEO at Teen Hype. We have the privilege of working with teenagers. We start off working with young people in middle school, go all the way through high school. We service thousands of kids in classroom, and then we work with young people in after-school programs to build leadership skills, assets, and agencies so they can make positive changes in their community. I am deeply passionate about education, and I care about education because it is the incubator for ensuring that young people are ready for the world. We have this responsibility to make sure that our next generation of leaders have all of the skills that they need in order to lead and to make changes in their community or just to thrive.
Well, I just stand where I stand because, not for that reason, because I agree, but I also oftentimes reflect on the educators that I've had in my life, and I hear other people talk about the educators that they've had in their life and why they are where they're at because of those teachers. So that's the way I interpreted the question, but I do agree with what you're saying about respecting and valuing the teachers. I think we all have had educators that we really appreciate and love and thank for being where we're at.
Yeah, if you had asked us, do we value education, we would all run that way.
Yeah.
But the society, that's a different question. Yeah.
I think if you look at the data, they say that 40 to 50% of teachers leave the profession within 5 years. And, when asked why, that, being valued or not being valued was one of the things that they, all listed as a reason to leave the profession. We also look at it in terms of pay, how much teachers are paid. Is that on par with what they should be getting paid as compared to other professions? So, the data does reflect that we don't value teachers as a society. Obviously, as individuals, we do. We wouldn't be standing here if we don't. But as a society, we don't, unfortunately.
And I think even when you talk about those leaving the profession, I also believe that because we don't pay teachers well enough, a lot of people are misplaced. Meaning there are those that are willing to take this vow of poverty, but it's not their gift to give to the world. And so they choose to operate in other spaces that are more lucrative instead of gravitating towards education, which might be their natural gift because they're not paid well. So part of that, those leaving the profession probably weren't meant to be there in the first place. They're just filling a space, and vice versa. Those who are meant to operate as educators in that space don't find their way there because they're not valued economically and supported in that way.
Absolutely right. When we look at recruiting talent, if people have to make a living, they have to have, salaries that will allow them to raise a family. And, it's really limiting the amount of talent that we bring into the city.
Just bury me now if it's not. Fire me now.
Yeah.
Dramatic change is possible. I mean, we have lived and witnessed dramatic change. So we have to believe in our possibilities to do that and not accept people saying, oh, it can't be that way, it can't be that way. I just want to say it's a value, it's a core to who we are, that we believe that we can create change and hold ourselves and other people accountable for that change. And to the point, we also know that there are states and there are countries that have really excellent models. So we have to get out of our perception of American exceptionalism and look to other places to learn and to grow so that we are, in fact, having an equitable place where all of our children and families can thrive and bloom.
That's why we do the work.
Absolutely.
That's why we do the work.
Because
Exactly.
we believe.
We believe.
Mic drop.
Right. We believe.
And every day, some of us go to work and see the young people that will be a part of doing it.
And that it has to be across our sectors, out of school time, health, mental health, social services, private sector. Education really is for everybody's voice to be involved in.
How am I feeling after today's conversation? I am energized. I really think it was great. I got to see a lot of different perspectives and it made me even more hopeful.
I'm feeling refreshed. I'm feeling really grateful to have had the conversation with such great leaders, brilliant minds, and I'm feeling inspired too.
I think that's the most important thing for me is that we talk and talk and talk, and we share and share and share, and it needs to move to action.
I feel like education is freedom. You know, education is the way to break cycles.
Education has to be part of the system that we wrap around our families to create the real democracy that not only we need in the United States, but I would venture to say throughout the world. Education is so important for the liberation of all of us to bloom.